God, it's hard when nothing seems to move, when everything looks the same and there's no clear sign that anything is changing. Because part of me wants to believe that you are working, but when I can't see it, my thoughts begin to question. And something inside of me starts to feel tired of waiting. If today you're in that place where you don't see any movement, but you know you can't give up, stay here and bring this before God with me. There are moments when everything around me looks the same. When I move through the day and nothing seems to shift, no visible progress, no clear signs, no indication that anything is actually moving forward. And that kind of stillness begins to weigh on me. Not because I expect everything to change instantly, but because I am trying to understand if something is happening at all. I have continued showing up, continuing forward, doing what I know to do, yet there are times when it feels like I am walking through something that has no visible response. And that silence is difficult, because it leaves space for my thoughts to begin searching for explanations, trying to figure out whether I'm missing something, whether something is wrong, or whether nothing is happening at all. There is a tension that builds in that kind of silence, not loud, not obvious, but steady, where I begin to question what I cannot see, where I start measuring everything based on what is visible. And when I do not find evidence, it becomes harder to remain steady. Not because I have lost direction, but because I am trying to find confirmation in places where it may not appear. Your word in 2 Corinthians 4:18 reminds me to fix my eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen, because what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. And I begin to understand that what I have been focusing on has been limited to what I can measure, what I can observe, and what I can confirm, and that has shaped how I interpret what is happening. There are situations that feel unchanged, circumstances that look exactly as they did before, and moments where I expected to see some kind of movement by now. But instead of visible progress, there is stillness, and that stillness can feel like absence if I am not careful with how I interpret it. Your word in John 5:17 says, "My Father is always at his work to this very day," and that shifts something within me, because it reminds me that your work is not dependent on whether I can see it, and that just because I cannot identify what is changing does not mean that nothing is happening. There are things that happen beneath the surface, processes that are not visible, alignments that take place without immediate evidence. And I realize that I have been looking for confirmation in ways that require visibility, when much of what you do does not begin in what is seen. There have been times where I expected clarity to come first, where I assumed that understanding would lead the way, and where I believed that seeing something change would give me confidence. But I begin to understand that not everything is revealed at once, and not everything that is in motion presents itself immediately. Your word in Isaiah 45:15 says that you are a God who hides himself, and I understand that this does not mean you are absent. It means that what you are doing is not always exposed to my understanding in real time, and that requires me to shift how I respond when I do not see what I expected to see. I also recognize how easily I can interpret stillness as stagnation, how quickly I can assume that nothing is moving simply because nothing looks different, and how that assumption can begin to influence how I feel, how I think, and how I continue forward. There are moments where I begin to measure everything based on visible outcomes, where I look for signs that confirm progress. And when those signs are not there, it creates a sense of uncertainty, not because something is necessarily wrong, but because I am trying to evaluate something that is not fully visible yet. Your word in Romans 8:28 says that all things work together for good for those who love you and are called according to your purpose. And I begin to understand that working together does not always look like immediate change. It often happens in ways that are not obvious at first, in ways that take time to unfold, and in ways that require me to trust that something is happening even when I cannot define it. There is a process that does not announce itself, a movement that does not always present evidence right away, and I see now that part of my struggle has been expecting visibility before it's time, expecting confirmation before the process is complete, and expecting clarity before everything has been aligned. I do not want to continue measuring everything by what I can see in the moment, because I understand now that doing so limits how I interpret what you are doing, and it keeps me tied to a perspective that only acknowledges what is visible while overlooking what is already in motion. And as I remain here, I begin to recognize that what feels still is not necessarily inactive, what looks unchanged is not necessarily untouched, and what I cannot see is not necessarily absent. And that realization begins to shift how I stand in this moment, not with full understanding, but with an awareness that there is more happening than what my eyes can currently perceive. What I fail to recognize in moments like this is not that something is missing, but that something is unfolding outside of my immediate awareness. in ways that do not depend on my ability to perceive it, understand it, or confirm it. And that challenges the way I have been interpreting everything. Because I have been relying too heavily on what is visible to determine what is real. There are layers to what you are doing that do not surface right away. Movements that take place beneath what I can measure. Alignments that are happening without announcing themselves. And I begin to understand that expecting everything to be visible from the beginning limits my ability to recognize the depth of what is actually in motion. Your word in Daniel 10 describes a moment where an answer was sent. Yet there was a delay that could not be seen from the outside. And that changes how I view what feels like silence, because it reveals that what appears inactive may already be in progress, that what feels delayed may already be advancing, and that what I cannot trace does not mean nothing is taking place. There are processes that require time not because they are slow, but because they are precise, because they are being formed in a way that cannot be rushed, adjusted, or forced into my timeline. And I begin to see that part of my struggle has been expecting outcomes to match my expectations, rather than recognizing that what is being built may require more than what I can currently understand. Your word in Habakkuk 2:3 says that the vision awaits its appointed time, that it speaks of the end and will not prove false, that though it lingers, I should wait for it, because it will certainly come and will not delay. And I begin to see that what feels like delay is not the absence of movement, but the presence of timing, something that is set, something that is unfolding, and something that does not depend on my perception to continue. There are things being arranged that I cannot yet identify, details being aligned that I have no visibility into, and outcomes being shaped that have not reached the surface yet. And I understand now that measuring everything based on what is already visible causes me to overlook what is still being prepared. Your word in Genesis 50:20 speaks of what was meant for harm being turned for good. And that reminds me that what I see at one moment is not the full picture, that what appears unchanged now may later reveal a depth of purpose that I could not have recognized in the beginning. And that shifts how I interpret what I am currently experiencing. I have been looking for evidence in the wrong place, expecting confirmation in what is already visible. When much of what you do begins before it can be observed, before it can be measured, and before it can be explained. And I begin to understand that my role is not to track every movement, but to remain grounded even when I cannot trace what is happening. There is a difference between something being hidden and something being absent. And I realize that I have confused the two, assuming that because I cannot see what is happening, nothing is happening, when in reality, what is hidden may be more active than what is visible. Your word in Hebrews 11:3 says that what is seen was not made out of what was visible, and that challenges how I have been evaluating everything, because it reminds me that what becomes visible originates from what cannot be seen, that what eventually appears is first formed in a place beyond my perception, and that changes how I respond to what I cannot currently observe. There are foundations being set, structures being formed, and directions being aligned that do not yet have visible expression. And I understand now that expecting immediate evidence places pressure on something that is still in formation, something that is still developing, and something that is not incomplete simply because I cannot see it yet. Your word in Isaiah 64:4 says that no eye has seen any God besides you, who acts on behalf of those who wait for him. And I begin to see that waiting is not inactivity. It is participation in a process that does not always present itself visibly. It is remaining steady while something continues to unfold beyond what I can observe. I also recognize that part of what is being shaped is not only external but internal, that there are things within me being adjusted, strengthened, and aligned in ways that I may not immediately recognize, and that what is happening within me is just as significant as what will eventually become visible around me. There is movement that does not need to be announced to be real, progress that does not need to be seen to exist, and work that does not need to be visible to be complete in its process. And I begin to understand that what I have been interpreting as stillness is not empty. It is active in a way that does not rely on my awareness. And as this becomes clearer, I begin to shift how I stand in this moment, no longer trying to force visibility before its time, no longer trying to measure what is not meant to be measured yet, and no longer assuming that nothing is happening simply because I cannot see it, because I understand now that what you are doing is not limited by what I can perceive, and that even now, beyond what I can recognize, something is already unfolding. Reaching this point changes the way I respond, because I am no longer trying to force evidence to feel secure. I am no longer depending on visible movement to remain steady, and I am no longer allowing what I cannot see to determine how I stand, because I begin to understand that stability is not built on confirmation. It is built on what remains true regardless of what is visible. There is a shift that takes place internally when I stop demanding proof before I allow myself to remain grounded, because I realize that waiting for visible confirmation keeps me tied to a cycle where my peace rises and falls based on what I can observe. And that is not a stable place to live from, especially when what you are doing does not always reveal itself immediately. Your word in 2 Corinthians 5:7 says that I walk by faith and not by sight. And I begin to understand that this is not about ignoring reality. It is about recognizing that what I see is not the full reality, that what is visible is only a part of what exists, and that what is unseen carries just as much weight, even if I cannot trace it in the moment. There are moments where I feel the urge to go back into analysis, to revisit everything, to question whether something is happening, to look again for signs that confirm progress. And I recognize that this tendency keeps me circling the same place mentally, trying to reach certainty through observation, when certainty is not meant to come from what I can measure. Your word in Psalm 62:5 says, "Yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from Him." And I begin to understand that rest in this context is not about stopping. It is about remaining steady, about not being pulled in different directions by uncertainty, and about holding a position that is not dependent on what I see in front of me. There is a discipline in choosing not to react every time something appears unchanged. A discipline in not revisiting what I have already placed in your hands, and a discipline in not allowing my thoughts to take me back into a place where I feel the need to figure everything out again. I also recognize that what I continue to focus on shapes how I interpret everything, and if I keep directing my attention toward what is not changing, I will continue to reinforce the idea that nothing is happening. But if I shift my focus toward what you have already said, toward what you have already established, then I begin to stand on something that is not dependent on immediate evidence. Your word in Isaiah 40:31 says that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. And I understand that waiting here is not passive, it is active in a different way. It is remaining in position. It is not stepping out of alignment. And it is not allowing impatience to pull me back into trying to control what I have already released. There are patterns that try to return, thoughts that try to reintroduce doubt, an internal pressure that tries to push me back into needing to see something before I can remain steady. But I begin to recognize those patterns for what they are, not as truth, but as reactions that come from habit, from past experiences, and from the need to resolve uncertainty quickly. Your word in Psalm 112:7 says that the one who trusts in the Lord is not afraid of bad news. Their heart is firm, trusting in the Lord, and I begin to see that firmness is not the absence of questions. It is the presence of stability even when questions remain. It is standing without being shaken by what has not yet changed. There is a way of moving forward that does not require constant checking, constant evaluation, or constant searching for signs. And I begin to step into that. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Choosing not to return to the same patterns that kept me unsettled. Choosing not to measure everything again. Your word in Hebrews 10:23 says to hold unswervingly to the hope I profess. Because you are faithful, and I understand that holding unswervingly means not shifting back and forth based on what I observe, not adjusting my position every time something appears unchanged, and not stepping out of what I know is true simply because I cannot see immediate results. There is strength in remaining where I am supposed to be, strength in not moving prematurely, and strength in not reacting out of uncertainty, and I begin to understand that this kind of steadiness is not something I create. It is something I step into as I align myself with what you have already established. And as I remain in this place, I'm no longer trying to prove that something is happening. I'm no longer trying to confirm it through visible change, and I am no longer allowing the absence of evidence to define what is real. Because I understand now that what you are doing does not need to be visible for it to be certain. And that gives me a way to stand that is not shaken by what I do or do not see. From this point forward, I choose to move differently, not because everything around me has changed, but because I no longer interpret what I see the same way. And I understand now that what appears unchanged does not define what is actually happening beneath the surface. There were moments when I depended on visible movement to feel secure, when I needed something in front of me to confirm that progress was taking place. And without that, everything felt uncertain, like I was standing still without direction. But I recognize now that this way of thinking kept me tied to what is immediate, limiting my ability to remain steady when nothing seemed to move. Your word in 2 Kings 6:17 reveals a reality that existed even when it was not visible, and that shifts how I understand everything around me, because it reminds me that what is present is not always what is seen, and what is seen is not always the full picture. And I begin to understand that what you are doing does not need to be visible for it to be real. There are situations that still look the same, circumstances that have not shifted in a way I can recognize, and moments where I expected something to be different by now, but I no longer measure what is happening based on those expectations. Because I understand that timing does not follow my perception and progress does not always present itself in ways I can immediately identify. Your word in Isaiah 43:19 says that you are doing something new even now, and asks whether I perceive it, and I begin to realize that perception is not always instant, that there are things unfolding that I may not yet recognize, and that my ability to see does not determine whether something is already in motion. There is a steadiness that forms when I stop revisiting the same questions, when I stop searching for signs in every moment, and when I stop measuring everything based on what appears unchanged. Because I am no longer trying to confirm what you are doing through what I can observe. I am choosing to remain grounded in what I know is true, regardless of what is visible. Your word in Psalm 33:11 says that your plans stand firm, and I take that into this moment, because it reminds me that what you establish does not shift based on what I see. It does not weaken because I cannot identify it yet, and it does not depend on visible confirmation to remain in place. I move forward without needing to reevaluate everything repeatedly, without needing to check for signs at every step, and without allowing the absence of visible change to create uncertainty within me. Because I understand now that what you are doing continues regardless of what I can perceive in real time. There is clarity in knowing that not everything unfolds in a way that can be tracked, that not every process announces itself, and that not every movement presents immediate evidence. And I accept that without resistance, because I understand that what is unfolding does not need to meet my expectations to remain true. And as I continue from here, I do so without needing visible reassurance, without requiring immediate answers, and without needing everything to make sense in order to remain steady. Because I understand now that what is unseen is not uncertain, what is hidden is not inactive, and what I cannot perceive is not without direction. And I move forward with that established within me, knowing that you are working, that nothing is standing still, and that everything is unfolding according to what you have already set in place. Amen.